Hello, today we are going to be making our very own interactive virtual pet that we have coded ourselves using Python. And to do it, we're going to use a Raspberry Pi, and this Raspberry Pi has a sense hat attached to it, which we're also going to use. A sense hat has an LED matrix, and this is what we're going to use to have our little pet avatar. And it also has a whole bunch of sensors, including movement sensors. So what we want to do is we want to be able to shake our Raspberry Pi and sense hat so that it triggers something to happen. Let's begin by first connecting the sense hat to the Raspberry Pi. You need to make sure, of course, that your Raspberry Pi is switched off before you do anything with the GPIO pins. Next, you want to make sure you have the most up-to-date version of Raspbian, the operating system for Raspberry Pi, because this includes all the Python files that you'll need to be able to control the sense hat. You can download this from the Raspberry Pi website by going to raspberrypi.org/downloads. Once you're happy that you've got everything together, you can plug the power into your Raspberry Pi and all of the LEDs on the sense hat will light up and make this beautiful rainbow pattern. Top tip, you'll know if you have the software you need correctly installed because after a few seconds those lights will go out. Once your Raspberry Pi has booted, the first thing you're going to need to do is to open up Python 3 or idle 3 by clicking on Menu, Programming in Python 3. Then you're going to need to create a new file by clicking on File, New File, and this is where we're going to write our Python code. With any Python program, the first thing we need to do is import all of the libraries and modules that we need. So in this case, we're going to need the sense hat library. So we're going to start with from sense hat with an underscore, import sense hat. Remember, capital letters in Python are really important. And we're also going to import the time library. We're then going to create this variable called sense, and we're going to use that so we can just shorten the commands later on. Time to get creative. You're going to need to design your avatar, your little pet. You can do this in a couple of ways. You could get some square paper and you could draw your avatar. You've got to remember it's got to be 8 squares by 8 squares. Or alternatively, you could use something like a spreadsheet and just colour in some cells. Here you can see my design for a pet, and I've created 2 versions, one that's slightly different. So you might not be able to tell, but I've moved the feet slightly so that later on when I program it, it's going to look like my pet is walking. Feel free to use as many colours as you like, but you will need to program them later on. So it's a good idea perhaps to just select a few at this point. Once you're happy with your avatar and with the colours you've selected, a good idea would be to go and find out the RGB Color Values for each of your colours. We're going to need that information in your program. So you can just Google RGB Color Values, and there are lots of websites just like this one that have all the different colours. You can find the colours that you want, and you can write down the red, green and blue values for each of those colours. Back to our Python program. What we need to do now is translate those colours into our code. So I'm going to use a variable to do this. So I'm going to start with the colour pink. I'm going to use the variable name p, then use an equals, and then inside brackets I'm going to put the RGB value for that colour. And I'm going to go ahead and put all my colours in under different variable names. We need to be careful here, of course, because if you want to use the first letter of a colour name like blue or black, both of those colour names start with the same letter. So we need to find a way to differentiate between the two. So you need to be careful here. Back to your avatar drawings. Here what you can see I've done is I've labelled every single cell in my grid. And I've labelled them with the variable names I've used for my colours. So if we start with the top line, you can see I've got E all the way across, which stands for empty. I've got P, which stands for pink, G for green, Y for yellow, and W for white. We need to translate this grid now into our Python code. So to do this, we're going to use something called a list. So I need to give my list a name. So my first avatar I'm going to call pet1. I'm going to use a square bracket because in Python, this is how we start a list. Then I'm going to write out the top line of my grid. So I'm going to type E, comma, then another E, comma, and in fact, my whole of my top line has empty cells in my drawing. So I'm just going to put 8 E's separated by commas. And if I go back to my avatar drawing in my grid, I can see the next line has a pink cell, and then the rest are empties, so E's. So I'm going to write that in underneath. And so just keep going until you have all of your lines of your avatar written out. Don't forget, indentation is very important in Python. You should have 4 spaces at the start of the line. And to finish your list, you're going to use a closed square bracket. So far in your code, you've done a lot of setup. If we were to run this program at the moment, nothing would actually happen on your Sense hat. So what we need to do is add a command that's going to make the avatar appear on the LEDs on the Sense hat. And so this is the line we're going to use, sense.get_pixels, and in brackets you need to put the name of your list. My list is called pet1. Then you need to save your file, give it a name that you'll remember, so I've called mine pixel pet. And then you can click run and run module to run your code. And what you should see on your Sense hat is your avatar. Now you've got one of the avatars coded, what you need to do is underneath the first list is create your second avatar. So remember, most of mine was the same, I just changed the feet. Remember though, just typing out your list isn't going to make it appear on your Sense hat. So what we need to do is adapt our code down the bottom, which actually makes things happen. So underneath my sense.setPixels pet1, I'm going to use time.sleep, and in brackets I'm going to put period of time. So 0.5 is 30 seconds. And then I'm going to use the sense.setPixels command again. This time in brackets though, I'm going to put pet2. So this code will start by showing the first avatar, and then after 30 seconds we'll show the second avatar. And we can test that this works by saving the file and then clicking on run and run module, and you'll see on your Sense hat it will start with the first avatar, after 30 seconds switch to the second avatar. But of course the problem now is that it never goes back to the first one, so I need to change my code so that it repeats. And of course in Python we can do this with a loop. In fact, we're going to use a for loop so we can set the number of times that it goes around. So I'm going to type for I in range, and then inside brackets I'm going to use a number like how many times do I want this to repeat. So I want it to repeat 10 times. I'm going to use a colon, and then you're going to need to indent all the code that's inside the loop with 4 spaces. We're also going to need to add another time.sleep to complete the loop. So there's always 30 seconds between each picture change. After the loop has finished, after it's gone 10 times, actually what I want the Sense hat to do is I want the screen to go clear, because at the moment it will just stop on one of the avatar pictures. So I'm going to use this command outside of the loop, so make sure your indentation is correct, and you're going to type sense.clear open close bracket. If you save and run your file, you should see your avatar changing, and you should see this happen 10 times before the screen goes clear. So the first half of my program is complete now. I've got my avatars working. What I want to do is start using the sensors on the Sense hat to be able to trigger my program. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my loop and my program that I've written so far inside a function. I can do this by first defining my function. So I'm going to write def, and then I'm going to give my function a name. So I've used walking, open and close brackets and colon, and then I'm going to put my loop and my code that's inside my loop. I'm just going to indent that so it's inside the function. We want to use one of the sensors on the Sense hat. We're going to use the accelerometer, and we need to start thinking about the 3 axes that this sensor will detect movement on. And so that's these 3 axes here, and we can write them in our code. We could define them as X, Y and Z, just to think more a little bit about perhaps what we've learned in maths. So we need to start out by finding out what are the values that the Sense hat currently has. So I'm going to use this line here that says sense.get_accelerometer_raw open close brackets .values open close brackets. And so what this line will do is it will say, hello Sense hat, can you tell me at the moment what are your accelerometer readings? And if your Sense hat is sat on a table, then those readings will be 0, 0 and 0. Because we want to use the movement as a kind of trigger, what we need to do is create a loop here, and we're going to use a while loop. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that nothing happens until the values of the accelerometer have gone above the value of 2. So if it's sat on the desk, it's going to be 0. If I'm shaking it, those values are going to be higher, and that's what's going to trigger my program. And of course, I've stored the program inside the function called walking, so I need to make sure that I put this inside this new loop at the bottom. Check that your code looks right, save it, run it, and test if it works. There you have it. You have made your very own interactive Sense Hat Pixel pet. And so far all we've done is program the walking command. If we wanted to turn this into a much more interactive experience, you might want to think of a way of perhaps using one of the other sensors to feed your pet. If pets aren't your thing, then there are lots of other artistic things you can do with the Sense Hat. Like here, I've taken Steve from Minecraft, I've programmed him, and when I shake, it changes to a creeper. Alternatively, why not take a look at raspberrypi.org, have a look at their resources. There is tons of stuff to get you started making some more creative experiences with a Raspberry Pi Sense Hat. You may have heard that Raspberry Pi are sending 2 of these up to the International Space Station as part of the AstroPi project, and the astronauts who are aboard the International Space Station are going to use it to run some experiments and some code written by children in the UK, which is very exciting. You can get your hands on exactly the same device that they all have on the International Space Station just by buying a Raspberry Pi and a Sense Hat. All the software that you need can be downloaded from raspberrypi.org. So what are you waiting for? Get coding. My name is Carrie Ann, and remember, I'm just a mouse click away.